Anastasia, you have emphasized the fact that a person as an observer triggers these changes with his choice in this or that direction. And it is he who is the observer. And it is he who triggers, in other words, additionally stimulates something that already exists. Rigdon, absolutely. Man constantly chooses between the spiritual world, with its force coming from the soul, and the material world, with its phantom games of the animal mind, which one way or another tries to redirect the life energy of a person for its own needs. These are the two dominant forces that create in the material world in this peculiar conditional confrontation, and man as an observer is only placed on the edge of choice between them. Moreover, for the beings of the material world who make up a part of the animal mind, these forces are invisible, but they're fateful for human, because there is a part of eternity, the soul, in him, and he has an opportunity to become an immortal spiritual being. Anastasia, therefore, the main determining moment for a person is what thoughts and actions he pays attention to in his everyday. Rigdon, that is absolutely correct. For better understanding, I will illustrate with a figurative example of an internet user what a person's choice between the two dominant forces is. When a person focuses his primary attention on something, in other words, makes a choice, he does not see how he triggers the beginning of these changes in the first dimension by doing this. In our example, this is equivalent to pressing the start button of a computer, which starts processes that are invisible to a person. So it is the person's attention that starts the process of movement at the level of the first dimension. Everything starts with it. This initial attention of the personality is the primary force of the observer. This is his freedom. Where you direct your primary attention is what you activate. Man does not realize the full significance of the actions that have happened at the level of the first dimension, but later he feels the consequences they have on his fate as quite real. When a person turns on a computer, as a consequence, characters and symbols of different programs that store certain information appear on the screen after a while. And if it is, for example, the internet, then before the user's eyes, a set of characters and symbols appears, behind each of which a more voluminous layer of information is hidden. The internet, in general, represents a complex interconnection with the world, but through different root, base, servers belonging to certain authoritative organizations and people who fund them secretly or openly. All this is based on the distribution of this or that ideology. By the way, such a notion as a domain name, which is today known to any resident of the Internet, comes from the Latin word dominium, meaning possession. As a rule, an Internet user does not stop and think about all this, diving into the stream of information provided for him to choose from. He sees details, but he does not see the whole picture, though he should. So then, the appearance of signs, symbols, various computer programs, and short advertising texts of the Internet, which hide whole layers of information behind them, all this is like interaction of the person's attention with information at the level of the second dimension. In the material world, if one considers all the information of the second dimension globally, this will only be a different form of manifestation of programs either from the animal nature or from the spiritual nature. Man has the freedom of choice, and while something out of this simply attracts his attention, something else holds it. As a result, out of all the variety, just like in an internet search engine, he opens only that information, focusing on it, which has attracted his attention the most. From the perspective of the third dimension, man makes his choice with this. In other words, he activates the process of obtaining information in the second dimension. By activating this information, he begins to live by it at the level of the third dimension. In other words, as a personality, he lets this flow of information into himself, and it manifests itself in the form of various images, emotions, desires, and thoughts in the consciousness, and it begins to live in him like an sentient being. This pushes the person to specific actions within the program of this will from the outside. The very one of the many programs by which this will has drawn his attention to itself in the second dimension. As soon as he lets them in, this becomes equivalent to his giving preference to work in this or that program and starting to move the cursor there, his attention, engaging different functions, mental images, desires, and emotions. And moving the cursor, as I have already said, equals to the creation, thanks to the exoosmos, of actions that are invisible to man at the first stages, but which then become events of his fate. Consciously, neither in the first dimension nor in the dimensions above does a person perceive what exactly he changes by applying the power of his attention to the program that he has chosen. But he, as a personality who has made a choice at a given point of time, is wasting his life force on materializing this will from the outside, working according to this program. Anastasia. And this point is very important. If we consider it globally, it turns out that we only think that we have will in the meaning of a force of creation, creating activity of the mind, or as they say in psychology, as a self-sufficient, having quiet and independent meaning, source of human activity, which determines the independence of behavior from objective reasons. It is interesting that those same psychologists relate will to control of your own behavior, which they believe becomes possible thanks to the use of artificial means of conduct, signs. Rigdon. What we believe to be our own will is an illusion of our perception from the perspective of thinking of an individual mind of a three-dimensional world. If we consider our example, a person just activates the incoming flow of information with his choice and spends his life force on realization of this will. Will, whether emanating from the spiritual nature, the world of God, or coming from the animal nature, the animal mind, is a force from the outside, or rather, an information program implemented in a certain structure that carries it out. The substitution from the animal mind lies in the fact that the personality of a human perceives the forms of manifestation of one of these two global forces as his own will, which in fact it does not have. Anastasia. In other words, what a person believes to be his own will and what he is excessively proud of is not his own. It's just a force that has entered him from the outside by means of the information he has chosen. It activates feelings, emotions, and thoughts in him that spur him on to certain actions within the program of this will, which is related to expenditures of life energy. Rigdon. Quite right. People, while under the influence of pridefulness from the animal nature, love to liken themselves to higher forces endowed with their own will. But not everyone asks themselves the questions, by whose will does that particular action happen? Who spurs me on to these thoughts? Who gives rise to these particular desires? Who in me is resisting and whom? And who is asking these questions and who is replying to them? And there are very few of those who sort themselves out, understanding the process of confrontation between the animal nature and the spiritual nature, between the will emanating from the spiritual world and the will from the animal mind. Of course, the animal mind is strong, but it cannot be compared to the primary force of the world of God. If the latter manifests itself clearly, the animal mind cannot resist it directly, but it can distract its conductor, the person standing on the spiritual path, with its trifles, in order to throw him off the right course, catch him with another illusion, and so on. The beginnings of manifestation of will in terms of creation appear in a person only when he, maturing spiritually, comes out from under the power of the animal mind. That is when he leaves the sixth dimension, getting into the seventh. And even then, it will not be a manifestation of will as such in the current human understanding, but simply a new quality and expansion of the abilities of the conductor of the divine will. Anastasia. Yes, such substitutions from the animal mind accompany human as a being that lives in the material world at every step. If a person does not work on himself, he is simply wasting his life on material desires, on the temporal and the mortal. Rigdon. On the one hand, a common person yearns to influence events of his life, craves for changes of his fate for the better. But these are all needs of the spiritual side, which his brain successfully turns towards the animal nature. As a result of this reversed understanding, people crave freedom in terms of matter instead of the spiritual freedom. They crave wealth, fame, satisfaction of their selfishness, and abundance in their temporary existence. If a person focuses on his material desires for a long time and makes a lot of effort to fulfill them from one year to the next, then sooner or later a series of events happen which leads to the desired result, even when by that time the person no longer needs it. In other words, a personality may have a certain impact on the three-dimensional world, achieve what it desires, but this process is accompanied by huge expenditures of effort and energy and takes a long time. However, the question here is different. Is it worth spending one's life and great potential on achieving the temporary material wishes of the body? Anastasia. Some readers are asking, what is the meaning of my life? Why am I here? Am I really here just to plant a tree, build a house, and raise children? And in their thoughts, they themselves respond that if that were the main purpose of man's existence on earth, then first of all, he would not need such a complex structure of matter, including such an overabundant organization of the brain, which includes various levels of the state of consciousness. Second, it would be logical to assume that everyone who already has a house, children, and a personal garden would be happy and satisfied with their lives. But in general, these people ask such age-old questions without finding satisfaction in achieving the desires of their youth. Rigdon. The meaning of man's life is not at all in reproduction and improvement of his material living conditions. These are just natural instincts of any animal which is genetically programmed to create a burrow or build a nest and so on in order to raise offspring. A human is more than an animal. His purpose is to become a spiritual, immortal being. But in chasing his material desires, man irrevocably squanders two valuable factors, time and life energy. I draw your attention to the fact that they're spent irrevocably, and consequently certain opportunities are lost. In his choice, man is free, of course, to fritter away the life force that he has on the programs of the animal nature in this illusory three-dimensional space. But as a result, he will miss the most important thing for which he has come into this world. And after all, man is given as much time and as much energy as he needs to free his soul, and even above that, more than enough for possible errors in the process of getting personal experience by his personality. Figuratively speaking, Time and life energy are like gasoline for a car, the body, which is enough to drive exactly from point A to point B with small deviations given the complexity of the way. But if you go in the opposite direction instead, if you dedicate your life to the whims of your material, for example, go to tune up your car, to satisfy the ego by the master, the animal nature, then as a result, you will run out of time and energy allocated to you. Eventually, you will lie so beautiful at a car junkyard of subpersonalities, just like the others around you, rusting and rotting. While you could have purposefully used that time and energy to get to destination B, where your final transformation into a completely different being, a spiritual being, would have taken place. Anastasia, as you once said, whatever little world of personal power man has built for himself in the material world, it is temporal and transient. Everything in this world has an end. Entire galaxies, stars, and planets are destroyed, and the human body is all the more mortal. Rigdon, it is difficult for people to understand that their existence is momentary, and they're afraid to even think about death. But death for man is just another form of life. It is the result of his lifetime choice. For a person in whom animal nature dominates, it is difficult to realize that there is something bigger than this material world. But when the personality works on itself and as a result gets in touch with the spiritual world, then it comes to realize that it is the spiritual world that is the real and the main creating force, and everything else in a person's life is just games of the animal mind, a chase after an elusive illusion. Anastasia, yes, this knowledge is really interesting and important, and it gives a completely different understanding of not only the visible, but also of the invisible world. Rigdon, absolutely, but perhaps let us get back to our conversation about the human structure in the invisible world. Human, like other information objects of the material world, from giant stars to the smallest particles, has certain projections, kind of his mirror reflections at the energy level. Different peoples at different times have denoted them differently, describing or recording the invisible structure of man in the chronicles of secret knowledge, sacred texts, and pictures. Let us conditionally call these life projections essences, as they are quite sentient, even more so than people suppose, and have their own characteristics. By their nature, these essences represent energy structures, certain local centers. In the invisible structure of human, these are the same inseparable parts of him, like the head, arms, and so on, are in the physical body. In the center of the structure, in the middle of all the projections of a person, is the soul. The essences are energy and informational structures, and they play an important role both in the life of man and in his after-death destiny. They have great capabilities and are connected with other dimensions where interaction takes place on a subtle energy level. Thanks to them, a person can influence the world from the perspective of higher dimensions of the material world, up to the sixth dimension. Human essences are named according to their location around the structure, as well as the conditional orientation relative to his physical body. The front, the back, the right, and the left essences. They represent the main fields, so to speak, the living sides of a four-sided, truncated pyramid in the overall human structure. They are approximately located at an arm's length from the physical body of a person in the directions corresponding to their names. In the front, in the back, and at the sides, on the right and on the left side. The knowledge about them has been considered sacred since ancient times. There exist many various references to them in the mythology of peoples of the world from antiquity to the present day. For example, this information can be found in cosmological myths and legends of the peoples of the world, in rituals of sorcerers, shamans, priests, and exorcists. In particular, the descriptions of the latter often say that a person addresses the four elements or directions of the world, the four spirit aids of man, and so on, while performing a certain traditional ritual. In many cases, the connecting link is the center. In the sacred legends, this is the soul as the center of man's energy structure, the fifth center. In other cases, it is referred to as the first center, while in practical rituals, it is the personality's consciousness. So the external actions of such a spellcaster are, as a rule, either a theatrical play designed for the public, imitation of the lost knowledge without understanding the essence, or mere concealment of it. In reality, the main action takes place in a person, in his inner world. With help of certain knowledge and practices, he simply gathers himself into a single whole and operates these essences. The personality is the control center. Thanks to such joining, the person's capabilities in the invisible world greatly expand. I draw your attention to the fact that these essences are not the astral doubles of a human. Each of the four essences represents, let us say, a certain energy field. Figuratively speaking, this is a transparent cluster which can turn into any thought form that a person sets. A mirror image of the person himself, or some image of an animal, spirit, and so on. We can say that a person, while doing certain meditation techniques in an altered state of consciousness, assigns to one of the essences a certain thought form, and focusing his attention on it, materializes that essence. Anastasia. So basically, it is a transition from the state of an energy wave into a material particle. As soon as the observer focuses on the essence, the process of transformation of energy into subtle matter takes place. Accordingly, it acquires a thought form, the image put into it by the person. Rigdon. Yes, at that, its connection with the invisible world is fully preserved. As I have already said, each of the four essences has its own characteristics and manifests a certain connection between the visible and the invisible world. The front essence is located in front, at an arm's length from the physical body of a person. It is connected with the person's life here and now, both in the third and in higher dimensions, and with his movement from the present to the future. This is a kind of a vector and an indicator of the life's way. If a person chooses the spiritual, then this path has one vector and a focused direction of striving forward to a higher and the final result, merging the personality with the soul, that is, to spiritual liberation. This essence is responsible for the person's self-development, for spiritual movement. It carries a peculiar emotional color, that of faith, spiritual love, and hope for the future. If a person's intentions on the spiritual path are stable, then it also serves for him as a very good protection against the external invisible influence of others or alien aggressive essences. Its activation can be seen by the state of the person himself, when he feels inspired, and when a surge of positive emotions and the deepest spiritual intentions can be observed in him. In legends of the peoples of the world, the front essence was often designated as a unicorn, as well as the element, spirit, of the sky, air. It was depicted in the form of a free bird, a falcon or the mythical thunderbird, the phoenix. In many cultures, the bird served as a symbol of the soul, the divine essence, the spirit of life, the spirit of the sky, freedom, ascent, inspiration, prediction, prophecy, and a connection between space zones. Anastasia. Indeed. In fact, birds were depicted already in the Upper Paleolithic era, and sometimes with emphasis on the sacred character of these designations. In the Neolithic age, they were also painted along with the solar, sun signs, which were placed above the birds. Rigdon. Quite true, which points to the special significance of these paintings, if, of course, the person possesses knowledge about secret signs. So getting back to the front essence, the knowledge about the operation of the four essences greatly expands human capabilities. Frequent losses of sleepers happen due to lack of basic knowledge in these matters. For example, the majority of sleepers act through their front essence without even realizing it, and thus make a big mistake which leads to poor performance in their work, waste of time, and high energy consumption, which often results in rapid lethal outcome for the operator. The more experienced sleepers act through their left essence. But more about that a bit later. Anastasia. Sleepers are largely unknown to society. This is a secret special forces unit in the national security structures of civilized countries. It is quite surprising that the policy of materialization of consciousness of the population takes place everywhere in the global community, and that the very seditious thought of creating a science to study the human energy body, the existence of which has already been known for a very long time, is ridiculed. In this context, an increase in the development of such special forces takes place in almost all civilized states which compete with one another. After all, their specialists are able to extract information without leaving the room, influence certain individuals at the energy level, or protect the top officials of these countries. Rigdon. Because the key word in this matter is politics. That is why this knowledge is not available to nations. By the way, do you know the origin of this special term, sleeper? As they say, as you name a ship, so it will sail. The word sleeper was borrowed from Norse mythology. The supreme god there was Odin. He was the god of wisdom and the father of witchcraft and magic spells, a connoisseur of runes and legends, a priest, a bearer of magical power. He had a shamanic intuition, knew magical arts, was cunning and insidious, and was the ruler of people. He later acted as the patron of military alliances and as the sower of military discord. So Odin possessed an 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, the slipper. He could carry his owner with lightning speed from the world of gods, Asgard, to another dark world, the world of the dead, Niflheim, the world of humans, Midgard. In other words, was able to slide between the worlds. It is on Sleipnir, according to legends, that Odin took part in the equestrian competition with the giant. Anastasia. Well, nothing changes in the people's world. The same political and priestly competitions at the expense of power and people's necks are still going on. I pity those people who work for this priestly structure and squander their unique powers on nothing, on whims of the human mind, enslaved by the animal mind. Rigdon. What can you do? People themselves make their choices. As they say in the East, wisdom never becomes perfect in one whose mind is not steadfast, who knows not the truth, and whose faith wavers. But let us get back to the topic of our conversation. The back essence is located at the back, at arm's length from the physical body. This is a kind of an observer of the present and a chronicler of the past. It is connected with the present and the past of the person with the accumulated information, and not only during this life. For it, the past is a database of information. The present is the control and tracking of information, so to speak, in the real-time mode, that is here and now. The back essence is a kind of a portal. It is an observer, which is directly linked to the pineal gland, epiphysis. Thanks to this portal, after mastering certain meditative techniques, it is possible to carry out tunneling to any point in the past. The back essence is usually depicted in the form of a fish, a seal, for example in the traditions of the northern peoples, a lizard, an elephant, or a turtle. It is denoted by the element of water, that which immerses into the depths of the past. The Siberian peoples have preserved mythological references about some kind of opposition of the bird and the mammoth, and it was the bird and the fish with the Sumerians. The back essence may also be depicted as a spirit with a human face, symbolizing the human past. The right essence is located at an arm's length to the right of the physical body of a person. This is in essence one of the constituent parts of the animal nature in man. More precisely, the right essence has several qualitatively different functions, the manifestation of which depends on what is dominant in man, the spiritual nature or the animal nature. The right essence is closely related to this world. The main emotional characteristics of its manifestation in man, when dominated by the animal nature, are aggression, despondency, or fear. If it is not controlled by a person in a proper way, then he often becomes subject to its attacks. The latter is felt as a flow of bad thoughts, or thoughts that provoke negative feelings, and as a sudden surge of the state of depression. Its attacks are characterized by the narrowing of consciousness to the level of a certain problem, as well as by such emotional states as despondency, anger, greed, resentment, self-blame, a manifestation of any fantasy or illusion, and looping of thoughts on the same problem. But this happens when a person gives the power of his attention to these thoughts. I must point out that all four essences simply trigger the birth of certain thoughts which correspond to various surges of certain emotional states. But the essences keep alive and amplify, especially when the animal nature dominates, twisting a situation beyond recognition, making a mountain out of a molehill. Only those thoughts that the personality chooses. Man has a choice, the thoughts of which essence to give preference and his attention to. Simply put, whom to listen to. But as soon as he makes his choice, that is, as soon as he gives preference to certain thoughts, active work of this or that essence which has triggered these thoughts begins. Anastasia. By the way, you once mentioned that the processes of so-called secret influence, mental manipulation, infection of the masses with ideas that stimulate aggression, anger, and negative emotions in people are associated with activating the right essence in people. Rigdon, that is so. Inhibition of the front essence in people and activation of their lateral essences are carried out by specialists experienced in these things. Such influence is similar to hypnosis. In a meditation, one can feel and observe the influence of the right essence, understand where and how this flow goes. It is felt as a downward pressure from the right, from the outside to the inside. However, if a person disciplines this essence, that is, if he exercises strict control over his thoughts and emotions, avoids negative feelings, strictly adheres to the spiritual direction, he will get an effective helper that is well oriented in the world of subtle matter and has a multidimensional connection with the same essences of other people. And I repeat, This connection happens regardless of time and space. In their sacred paintings, different peoples generally portrayed the right essence as some strong or aggressive totem animal, for example, the white tiger, the Kyrgyz shamans, bear, lion, leopard, monkey, and so on, or a mythical guardian, spirit. Mentions of this are recorded in archaic mythical and ritual traditions whenever aggression, fear, or unusual force is mentioned. They usually indicated fire as the element that symbolized this essence. The left essence is located at an arm's length to the left of the physical body. This essence is connected with the world of Ahriman, the world of the sacred knowledge of the material principle. It is endowed with a great number of features and functions, but again, their use by the personality depends on what is dominant in person, the spiritual or the animal nature. When the animal nature dominates, the left essence is characterized by guile, pridefulness, deceit, and seduction. This is a clever and cunning essence which will present everything in the best possible light, its only aim being the distraction of a person from the main aim, from the spiritual path. If the personality does not control this essence in a proper way, it triggers doubts in a person and leads him away from the spiritual path. While the right essence is associated with blunt aggression and anger, the left essence, on the other hand, can win with its logic, show the clarity of consciousness in building a logical chain from the animal nature. Just like the front essence, it pushes a person to search for something new, but in the material direction, suggesting that a person deserves more or that he's more significant than others. In general, the idea of megalomania and the thirst for secret power over others are the basis of its attacks on the personality when the animal nature dominates in consciousness. When such thoughts visit a person, then in the state of meditation, one can also trace pressure from the outside. It will be felt as downward and pressing from the left side. If a person disciplines himself and his thoughts more often, steadily adhering to the spiritual path, then the left essence also becomes a personal assistant and a private informant on sacred matters. In ancient treatises, the left essence is commonly referred to or portrayed either as a terrifying beast or a clever and cunning animal, such as the wolf, jackal, a mythical monster, dragon, snake, or as a guardian and a spirit. As a rule, earth, or rather ashes, are indicated as its element, symbolizing temporary values in this world.